2024 than the year before. In all, almost 33,000 procedures occurred in the Commonwealth in 2024. The 25 to 29-year-old age group had the most abortions. George Williams reporting.
Authorities in Nepal have imposed a curfew on a key border city after Hindu and Muslim groups began protesting against each other. The vandalism of a mosque over the weekend sparked the protest. According to the curfew orders, no one will be allowed in the streets, and all gatherings and demonstrations are banned. This is SRN News. Britain is a little more familiar with rain than it is snow, but Britain is now bracing for another severe winter storm. We get more details from correspondent Karen Chemis.
Heavy snowfall and strong winds are expected, and weather authorities have warned could bring a risk to life. The brunt of the storm, coming in from the Atlantic, is set to be felt in central England, with as much as 12 inches of snow falling in just a few hours. Britain's National Meteorological Service, known as the Met Office, has issued amber warnings for many parts of the UK. This means there's the possibility of travel delays, road and rail closures, flight cancellations, power cuts, and potential damage to property. Storm Goretti, which has been named by the French weather service France Météo, is expected to leave Britain's shores by Friday before impacting other parts of northwestern Europe. Karen Shamas, London.
You'll find more on these stories at srnnews.com. From Washington, I'm Bob Agnew.
2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 17 gives us the assurance of transformation. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. God's promise that we can be new in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 17.
Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Do you know Christ as your Savior? Learn of Him daily, right here on VCY America.
You're listening to VCY America Worldwide, KVCX Gregory, and WVIW Bridgeport.
History was made on today's date. Stay tuned for an American Minute with Bill Federer.
Though the War of 1812 had ended 2 weeks earlier, news had not yet reached New Orleans, and on this day, January 8, 1815, 5,000 British soldiers charged in a frontal assault against General Andrew Jackson's Tennessee and Kentucky sharpshooters. French pirate Jean Lafitte and his men aided the Americans. In just a half hour, 2,000 British were killed, but only 8 Americans. General Jackson wrote, "It appears that the unerring hand of Providence shielded my men from the shower of balls, bombs, and rockets, when every ball and bomb from our guns carried a mission of death."
This has been an American Minute with Bill Federer. For a free transcript, call American Minute at 1-888-USA-WORD.
VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And friends, thank you for joining us on Crosstalk today for a very unique program that really fitting for today. It was January 8 of 1956, 70 years ago today, that 5 men, Jim Elliot, Nate Saint, Ed McCully, Peter Fleming, and Roger Youderian, were martyred in the jungles of Ecuador. These 5 men, along with their wives and children, went to Ecuador to bring the good news of the gospel to a tribe that had never before heard this good news. In the words of T.E. McCully, the father of Ed McCully, he indicated that the incident has proved to be one of the greatest chapters in the annals of missionary martyrdom. Joining us on this historic day, we welcome Steve McCulley, the oldest of three boys of Ed and Mary Lou McCulley. Steve was born in 1952 while his parents were receiving missionary medical training. And in December of 1952, the family sailed to Ecuador, where he spent the next 10 years of his life. But after just 3 years there, his father was killed, speared to death by the Aucas. It's our privilege to have him with us today. Steve, thank you for joining us on Crosstalk.
Thank you, Jim. I'm privileged and honored to be here. I'm looking forward to this experience. I hope my sore throat doesn't affect us too much.
Well, Steve, today marks the 70th year of your father's death, along with 4 other men called to reach a tribe in Ecuador. And we'll get into the specifics as we move along, but I'm sure your mind has just been racing today with a number of thoughts, including just the magnitude of what unfolded 70 years ago today.
Well, it is remarkable that 70 years later, it's still a big story in the Christian world. Mm-hmm. This morning, I received a text from a good friend. I received a text from the state of Minnesota from a family that I met when I was doing a homeschool conference there. Of course, my brother and I, we call January 8th Mom's Day. There's Mother's Day, but this day always emphasizes to the two of us and now our wives and kids, how special our mother was.
Yeah. Well, I understand your dad had a local tie to our area, attending high school right here in Milwaukee.
Yeah. In fact, my grandpa McCulley, I've been back to that church a few times. That's where he grew up, and there's still a real strong connection there.
Yes.
I guess that every year on January 8th or that weekend has a service that remembers the incident. In fact, my brother and I were asked to come back there probably 11 years ago, and we got to speak.
Wow. Well, certainly the lives of your father and the other men who were with him have impacted the world of missions forever. And I'd like you to, Steve, if you would just tell us about your dad and his passion and what led him to go to the mission field.
Well, I'll answer that as well as I can, but I was only 3 years and 10 months old when my dad was killed. So most of my memories are, I don't really have memories. It's what I've been told.
Right.
And I've been fortunate that I've been surrounded by people who knew my dad, who loved my dad. And from what I've been told, he grew up, his dad, his mom were devout Christians, and all 3 of their kids were brought up in the Lord. And he was going to serve the Lord in whatever it was he did. But it wasn't until after college that he felt the call to go to the mission field. He graduated from Wheaton College as the president of their senior class, and he won the National Oratory Contest. I was just the other day looking at some of the speeches he made on James Monroe and Ben Franklin, and the one he won the contest with was about Alexander Hamilton. But he felt like God wanted him to go into law. I just listened to a podcast that Aunt Betty, we call Elizabeth Elliot Aunt Betty. All of the adults when we were in Ecuador were aunts or uncles if they weren't your parents. But when he was interviewing Mom, talking about my dad, and she said that when they were at Wheaton, she was a year older than my dad, but she was at Wheaton at the same time. And she said all of us at Wheaton felt like Ed McCulley's going to wind up being president of the United States one day.
Wow.
Because that's what he loves, and he's going into he's going into law, and they felt like that would, lead him into politics. And then God changed his mind.
Yeah. How did he ever meet up with the likes of Jim Elliot and Nate Saint, Peter Fleming, and Roger Youderian?
Well, he met Jim Elliot at Wheaton. They were classmates at Wheaton College. And from what I've been told, Jim was already committed to going to the mission field, and he tried and tried to talk my dad into going. But when they graduated, they went their separate ways. My dad went to law school. And then after a year of law school, that's a whole other story that we can share later if you're interested. He felt like that's not what God wanted. And after he told his dad, my grandpa, I think one of the first people he contacted was Jim. And they connected, and they wound up spending a year together doing mission work in East St. Louis. And I don't know, I think he met Pete Fleming maybe when he was at Biola. Pete wasn't there, but I think Pete and Jim went to Ecuador via boat, and they shipped off from Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if my dad had met Pete before then. And I know that Roger and Nate, he met them on the mission field.
Wow, okay. So, yeah, let's talk about this, because your dad was going to go to law school and in schooling, and I've got a copy of a letter that your dad wrote September 22, 1950, to Jim Elliott, and the setting is interesting. Your dad was actually serving as a desk clerk at a hotel?
My dad had finished his first year of law school, and he got this job where he was a desk clerk, which was going to be a perfect job because once everybody checks in, the desk clerk is just sort of a cush job. You just have to be there. And he was going to use that time to study because there's a lot of studying in law school. But he had the job before school started, and so he was using that time to do Bible study. And as we now know, he read the book of Nehemiah, and the book of Nehemiah speaks to everybody differently. But to my dad, it convicted him that God wanted him to give up this cush job and go to a foreign land and serve him there, similar to what Nehemiah did.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't wait to talk to him about it because I don't know, how long he'd been reading Nehemiah and what all was behind it. But what I've heard from my mom and from my grandpa and my dad's younger brother lived to be 92, my Uncle Jay, and he wound up being one of my heroes. He was like a father figure to my brothers and I.
Friends, we're talking with Steve McCulley today, the oldest child of Ed and Mary Lou McCulley. Ed, one of the 5 missionaries martyred in Ecuador. And we're on this letter right now, and I'd like to quote from this letter because it's very interesting what your dad wrote to Jim Elliott. He said, "I have one desire now, to live a life of reckless abandon for the Lord, putting all my energy and strength into His service. I'm praying that He'll see fit to send me somewhere where the name of Jesus Christ is unknown." I mean, he was talking about, he was interrupting his law school, and all the aspirations that he had to plan, follow that pursuit, and talked about living a life of reckless abandon for the Lord.
Yeah, and again, this was before my time, right?
Right.
What I've been told was the first person he told was after work. He went home and told his dad, and his dad said, "Ed, whatever God's calling you to do, we are totally in support of that." And then he went to the college, and he got mixed results from telling the dean and some of his professors as to whether or not he was throwing his life away, or some of them supported him.
That's a very interesting response, but though that mixed reaction from law school, he was pretty determined in his heart, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I think it's great that he called Jim because, people used to say, Jim Elliott talked your dad into going to the mission field. And I'll never forget my Uncle Jay said, "Steve, nobody talked your dad into anything. He was going to do what he felt was right."
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that knowing that Jim wanted that so badly, he would have been one of the first persons he contacted.
Right.
And they spent a year together in East St. Louis before Jim went to Ecuador before my dad did.
So again, that phrase that he wrote in that letter, "I have one desire now, to live a life of reckless abandon for the Lord, putting all my energy and strength into His service," doesn't sound like somebody else made up his mind for him. I mean, that came from within.
Right. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So how was Ecuador chosen?
I'm not sure, except I know that they had contact with people from Ecuador.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, as it turns out, the president of Wheaton College Raymond Edmond at the time, had been a missionary to the Quichua Indians in Ecuador. And then after that, he came back. And that's another story just about how all of us are connected. You know, we're all connected in different ways, in ways that we don't know. But they knew of this tribe down there. I think it's not correct to say that they went there specifically to reach the Aucas, as they were then known. Mm-hmm. But they did know about them, and I know that they prayed for years about the opportunity to reach this people. But all of them were serving with other people groups before that happened. Mm-hmm. And the McCulleys and the Flemings were with the Quichua Indians in different settings.
But he wanted to go somewhere where the name of Jesus was not known.
Right. And even when they went to Arajuno, they were the first missionaries ever there. And the Elliots went to Shandia. They were the first missionaries there. So they were preaching the gospel to folks who had never heard before.
And friends, the resolve that they had led them to the exact situation in Ecuador. And we are just a minute from a break here, so we're going to learn more about that time going to Ecuador and what we know about their early days there. We're talking today with Steve McCulley, who is the oldest of three boys of Ed and Mary Lou McCulley, and Steve born in 1952. His parents were in medical training at that time, a missionary medical training. It was in December then, just not too many months after he was born, that the family went off to Ecuador, where they spent the next 10 years of his life. But it was just after 3 years there that his father was killed, speared to death by the Aucas. And when we come back from the break, we're going to learn more about Ecuador itself as to those early days there, the contacts with the tribes, and what happened there with those early contacts, and then what exactly led to the martyrdom. Many of you perhaps are familiar with their story, and maybe it transformed your life in some way. It's been documented in different books, such as Through Gates of Splendor, and we'll have more discussion following the break. You're listening to Crosstalk, coming your way from the VCY American Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, Creation Seminar speaker at the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, any evidence for creation from the solar system?
Yes, there are, Chris. In fact, quite a few. One of the ICR physicists, Dr. Russ Humphreys, made a prediction a few years ago before the exploration of Jupiter by satellite. He had developed a theory of the magnetic field of planets in the solar system based on the Bible. And the satellite found the evidence fit his model and not the evolutionary model of long ages. In particular, Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, has an Earth-like magnetic field, but it's tilted 80 degrees away from the spin axis. This pretty much proves that the magnetic field is not produced by fluid currents in the moon's interior, as is postulated by long-agers for Earth. As a matter of fact, the Earth's dipole magnetic field is decaying so fast, soon it's going to be gone. It couldn't be the result of events millions of years ago, and that's the Back to Genesis truth.
Thanks for tuning in to Back to Genesis.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. This day, January 8, 1956, that was 70 years ago today, was a martyrdom of 5 men, missionaries, Jim Elliot, Nate Saint, Ed McCulley, Peter Fleming, and Roger Udarian. With us today is Steve McCulley, the oldest of 3 boys of Ed and Mary Lou McCulley, who served in Ecuador, and this marks the 70th anniversary of when his dad was martyred on account of his advancing the gospel message. And Steve, I'd like you to again, you're just newly born at this time. Your father was killed before your 4th birthday. So much told to you by your mother and others that were there. Your Aunt Betty, Elizabeth Elliott, and others. What can you tell us about their early days in Ecuador?
Well, we sailed out of New York on an empty banana boat down to Quito, Ecuador, through the Panama Canal. And then we went to landed in Guayaquil, on the coastal city there, went to Quito, and my folks spent a few months there learning practical Spanish. They lived with a Spanish family because even in the jungle, the Quichua Indians, some of them spoke Spanish. So we knew we eventually were going to work with the Quichuas in a village called Shandia. And as it turns out, the Elliots were there too. So the Elliots and the McCulleys joined forces there, but the Quichua was flourishing. And they quickly decided there's no need for two families here. There's another Quichua village 6 hours away via the jungle trail. The only ways to get around there are either by the river or walk the trails. But there was a little village in Atajuno, and so it was decided that my folks would go down there. An interesting story is that one of the first, maybe the first Quichua believer in Shandia was a teenage girl named Carmela. And Carmela became one of my mother's best friends. And Carmela had lots of friends there. The church was growing. They had fellow believers, and they had a great time. But eventually, when we were going to leave, my mom asked her if she would consider coming with us. And she said yes, she would, even though she had her friends here, her parents were here. But she had numerous relatives in Atajuno who she knew did not know the gospel. So she decided to come. And when we got to Atajuno, we already knew a lot of this because my dad was going there on weekends. And Atajuno was an abandoned Shell Mera plant. Shell Oil had been there searching for oil years before. But they had given up the project because they were losing too many workers. They were being killed by these savages in the jungle. They're known as Auca. Auca is the Quichua word that means savage. We now know them as the Wadani, which means the people in their language. So anyway, we wind up going to Atajuno. There was a concrete pad there that my folks were able to use as the base for their home, and that was there from the days when Shell was there. And our house was on the one side of the Atajuno River, and the village was on the other side of the Atajuno River. But we had developed relationships with the Quichuas. They were at our house all the time, and a number of them became believers there. But nobody would stay at the McCulley house after the sun went down because we lived on the Auca side of the river. That's how close the two territories were. Anyway, my mom is teaching Carmela Bible stories, and Carmela's teaching my mom Quichua, and Carmela, is sort of my nanny. She's probably a 15-year-old, and I'm 3 years old. And they had a close relationship for the whole time that we were there. But my mom told me a number of times there was one thing that they disagreed about, and that was whenever the topic of reaching the Wadani, the Aucas, came up, Carmela begged them not to do it. Carmela said, "Don't do it. They're not worth it. They'll probably just kill you. They're like animals." And of course, the missionaries, felt God's calling that these. I'm sorry, I got a disturbance here. They were called to do this, and so eventually did. It was something that Carmela had wanted. And then the way that story plays out is an incredibly cool story. But so when we're in Atajuno, now we are close to the Wadani territory. In fact, there were encounters with Wadani, with Aucas, during the time that we lived there. And again, the Quichuas were terrified of these people because they were nomads of the jungle. Nobody knew where they lived, but they would show up and wreak havoc. They would kill people. The story of a Quichua woman who went to the river, right? And the river is the source of life. It's where you get your water, where you wash your dishes, wash your clothes. It's where you fish. But who went to the river to wash their pots and pans, and they found her dead, and the pots were gone. So that's the source of the fear that these people had.
Mm-hmm. So
it's I could just keep going.
So tell us about their initial contacts then with the Aucas, and we know that their lives were later taken, but how did they initiate contact with them?
Well, so that's an issue, right? Because they're feeling God's calling, but you can't bring the gospel to anyone if you don't know where they are, and if you don't know how to communicate with them, right? Nobody knew their language, but there was this a young Wadani girl who had run away from her tribe, from her family earlier, at her father's advice, because unbeknownst to the outsiders, to the missionaries, these people were not only killing other people, but they're killing themselves. They have a violent culture where if we have a disagreement, the way we deal with it is we kill the people we disagree with. And it was rampant. We now know, all these years later, that 60% of the homicides in that culture, in the generations leading up to the missionaries encountering them, were due to homicide. I mean, there's a boatload of ways you can die in the jungle without killing each other, but that's what was happening.
Wow.
They say that the average age of the men was 30 years old because they were warriors and they'd kill each other. And what happened was my family has a problem with Jim Schneider's family, so we decided we're going to wipe them out. And we might get Jim, and we might get his wife, and we might get his kids, but if we don't get his brother and that part of them, they're coming after us. That's how they wound up being nomads, right?
Yeah.
There are disagreements, there are these killing sprees, and we got to go find another place. So the missionaries are praying. And that's all you can do at this point, right? But the action that they took was Nate would fly around to the jungle every day of the week. He had someplace he would go. And when he flew to Atahuno, they built in time that he and my dad are going to get in the plane, and they're just going to go flying out over the jungle, looking for, as they call it, for their neighbors. The Amazon jungle's big. They flew for, I don't even know how many weeks they flew, but for weeks and weeks, they flew and didn't find anything. Of course, Nate's charting where they've gone, and they go somewhere else. And they know there's all types of rivers that are eventually going to feed into the Amazon. But they're searching. And then eventually, they find a site, they find life. They find people, and they feel like that's an answered prayer, right? But still, they're not ready they don't know how they're going to reach them. That's when they start the old bucket drop project, where Nate was an ingenious aviator, and he developed a technique where he could fly over this little tiny village on the river, and he could have a bucket in the back of his plane, and my dad would be in the back, and they would put gifts in the back, and my dad would reel it out in the bucket. When he flew in a circle, the bucket would spiral down and land on the ground. And I've heard a number of times the story of the first time this happened. Of course, the Wadani, they haven't seen planes, right? They're in the middle of nowhere. And when they see this would-be, they called it, they're terrified. So they see that thing start to circle, and they're out of there. But Nate's got it designed so that when it hits the ground, it releases, and they fly off. And then they come out, and they look, and there's stuff to eat. And there might be a machete, or there might be a pot or a pan. And it doesn't take long. The next week, they're not so hesitant. After just a few weeks, they are actually building a platform for them to deliver it on.
Wow.
And they're climbing the platform. And each week the guys are getting more and more excited, because then what happens, and they did this for 13 weeks. None of this was a rush, right? Because they've got other duties too. They're missionaries, and Nate, every day he's got to fly somewhere else. But what convinced them was all of a sudden the Wadani would take the gifts out, and they'd hold on to the bucket while they put gifts in.
Wow.
I've got pictures of my dad wearing a headpiece that was there. They put a parrot in there that became Steve Saint's pet. I don't know why Steve Saint got it instead of me, but it became that. And they felt like they're friendly. They want to be friends with us. Mm-hmm. They proceeded all based on prayer. And one of the key people in this whole story is Dayuma, the girl who ran away from her tribe. Her father had told her she should run away because he thought that he was going to be killed. They were in the middle of one of these killing feuds with one of the warriors named Moipa, and everybody was terrified of Moipa. And Dayuma ran away, and she came to a Kichwa village, and she found out, well, they didn't kill me. And she grew up there. And eventually, she became a believer. Rachel Saint, Nate's sister, met her, and she became a believer. And this was years later, so she had forgotten a lot of her Wadani, right? She doesn't speak Wadani anymore, but she knew some of it. And we don't know exactly how old everyone is when this happens, but she was a little girl. Mm-hmm. And she was probably a late teenager by the time this was happening. This is over 10 years later. But the guys felt like they could, they found out from her things like, I want to be your friend, right? That type of thing. So,
Steve, we're going to have to take a break right here, and we're going to come back and see what happened leading up then to that date of January 8, 1956. Friends, again, you're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Steve McCulley is our guest today, the son of Ed and Mary Lou McCulley. Ed, one of 5 missionaries that were martyred on this day, January 8, 1956, 70 years ago. Many of you listening right now can remember that, or you read the stories of Jim Elliott, Nate Saint, Ed McCulley, Peter Fleming, Robert Udarian, and going to unfold what happened on that date of January 8, 1956. We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America.
As we strive to be like Christ, there are besetting sins which take us off course. Sinful anger is one of them. Anger is a willful and deliberate choice, often caused by not being able to attain our prideful or selfish goals. If not dealt with, anger will turn into something worse. Another besetting sin is that of anxiety and fear. Ungodly anxiety goes beyond reasonable concern and involves worry about mere possibilities. And then there's the ungodly fear. Fear that often paralyzes and causes us to focus on our circumstances rather than on God and His promises. There is hope. In the booklet, Anger, Anxiety, and Fear, author Stuart Scott provides a biblical perspective on these issues, providing the path to victory. Anger, Anxiety, and Fear. Available for a donation of $9 or 3 copies for $24. Call VCY 1-800-729-9829.
Friends, a very special Crosstalk program today on VCY America titled Operation ACA 70 Years Later. If you go to our website, vcy.org, you're going to find near the top of the page information on this 70th anniversary. Randy Melchert has put together just a wonderful collection of newspaper clippings, and there's also some video and so forth from different film and releases that have come out in regard to this. You'll find it at vcy.org. The short movie of Through Gates of Splendor and the full movie is available there. Other postings are there. Just go to vcy.org. You'll find it near the top of the page. January 8th, 70th anniversary of Operation ACA. With us today, Steve McCulley, the oldest of the children of Ed and Mary Lou McCulley. And on this topic here, Steve, there was a letter that your dad and mom wrote on December 27th, 1955. Now, this was just 2 weeks before he was martyred, and it said this: "During the past year, we have been able to preach the name of Jesus in areas where his precious name has not been heard." He then went on to ask for prayer and gave 2 specific prayer requests. First, that some would be saved in these places where Christ is preached. And number 2, that during this new year, that would be 1956, 70 years ago, that we will have the privilege of declaring the gospel to more souls that are, still in this darkness here. And very interesting that this passion, this prayer request going out less than 2 weeks before his life was ended.
Yeah, they were reaching all kinds of Quechua folks, right? Mm-hmm. Folks were accepting Christ. People were being baptized. The church was growing. But when they wrote this letter, of course, they were well on the way to making their attempt to reach the Waodani.
Yeah.
As you said, 11 days later that they were killed.
So take us to that date of January 8, 1956, 70 years ago today.
Right. Well, so they make this friendly contact, and now they have to, find a place. And Nate finds a little sandbar on the beach that he thinks he can land his plane, and they figure out that they can do it, and they bring in material for build a tree house that they can stay in, and eventually they're all there, and they head in on Tuesday, right? And no contact, and they're just hanging out. They're wandering around. They're saying a few Auca phrases that they know. They're waiting for a chance to meet somebody, and it's not until Friday that they have a friendly contact. 3 Waodani come out of the jungle: a young man, and a young woman, and an older woman. And they named the man George. His actual name was Nankiwi. And Gamadi, who it turns out was Dayuma's sister, and Ngamo. And they have and those of you who are familiar with the story, you've seen the pictures. Nate takes Nankiwi up in a plane ride. Everything is friendly. They are, they're just so enthused that they've made this friendly contact. What they don't know is that they've landed right in the middle of one of these Waodani feuds. Nankiwi wants to marry Gamadi, but Gamadi's brother, Nampa, does not want Nankiwi marrying his sister because Nankiwi has already killed a previous wife. He has another wife, and Nampa doesn't want anything to do with it. And with Nankiwi going out to the jungle with Gamadi, that's like, taking her out to get married in their culture. But they have a chaperone with them, so it's okay. But Nankiwi and Gamadi leave, and the older woman stays on the beach for hours later. And turns out Nankiwi runs into Nampa with Gamadi, and Nampa wants to kill Nankiwi on the spot. Right? And of course, none of this is known to the missionaries. And Gikita, the older, seasoned warrior, says, "Hey, let's not kill each other over this. Nothing good ever happens from the outside world. I say we kill them." So it's just due to this misunderstanding, that this is what happened. Right? So the guys think everything's great. Ngamo, the older chaperone, she went back and told them, "Hey, Nankiwi's lying." But their culture, it was just their fallback behavior. That's how they dealt with anything that was scary, anything that was different. And so it was it's really a tragedy that God allowed, and that's what happened. The guys, on Sunday, when Nate flew in, Nate took the plane out every night so that, if the river flooded or if there was a surprise attack, the plane wouldn't be caught in there. So he's back from Atahuno, and he sees a bunch of Waodani coming, and so he's excited. He radios his wife and says, "Maybe they'll be here in time for a 12 o'clock service, and I'll come to you at 3 o'clock." They're excited, not knowing that things have changed. It's an ambush, and they're all killed.
My. How did your mom receive word?
Well, they were supposed to call at 3. I mean, they were supposed to phone Marge at 3, and they're all in radio contact. Marjorie Darian's with my mom in Otahuno, and Elizabeth Elliott, she's in Shandia, and I think Olive's in Shell with Marge. But they're in communication, but there's no contact. And so Marge tells them, I'm not sure what's going on, but we have no contact. And once it gets dark, the plane's not going anywhere. And Mom and Aunt Barb are waiting for the plane to fly back because he flew it back every night. And some of you have seen the picture of Aunt Barb standing with her little kids on the runway, waiting. But the plane doesn't show up. So they go to bed at night, Saturday, January 8th. I'm sure nobody slept much at all, not knowing what's happened, but knowing that something's not, the way it should be, because Nate always makes contact. The next morning, the other MAF pilot, Johnny Keenan, gets in his plane and flies down there, and he sees the plane just ravaged on the beach. He doesn't see any bodies, but he knows something's gone bad. And so he comes back and reports it, and so the wives don't know if their husbands, have made it into the jungle, if they're, fleeing for their lives, or they just don't know. But when the Quichuas, so we're in Otahuno, we're not that far away by boat, right, by canoe. And when the Quichua Indians heard that something had happened to Senor Eduardo, they got in their canoe, and they're terrified of these people. But they went down the river to look to see what they could find. Meanwhile, the missionaries and the Ecuadorian government, they're organizing a rescue team. It takes a couple days for the rescue team to come, but before they ever get there, the Quichuas, they go down the river and they find my dad's body in the river. And they take his watch off, and they take his size 13 shoe, and they bring him back. He's the one that they were looking for because he's the one they knew. So my mom got the word first, and everybody knew that had died, but they still don't know what's happened. And then the rescue team comes in, and if you watch the documentary Beyond the Gates of Splendor, Frank Drown led that rescue, and he was a missionary, a lifelong missionary down there who they all knew and loved. And they went down the river, and they never did find my dad's body. They think it must have just washed away. But they found the other 4 bodies and buried them in a common grave there on the river. Came back and told the wives. It's hard stuff. Yeah. And it would have been a terrible tragedy, except that God's in control.
Your mom actually stayed in Ecuador after this, did she not?
Yeah, 4 of the 5 of them did. My mom actually, my mom did leave. They were killed in January, and we came back to the States because she was 8 months pregnant with my youngest brother, Matt. And he was born in the States, and then we stayed because she didn't know what to do. She wanted to be a missionary desperately, but she felt like with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old and an infant, what could she do in the jungle? And then what happened is she got the opportunity to manage a children's home. What they did back in those days was missionary kids, when they got to be school age, they frequently came to the city and went to the American English-speaking school. And so they needed a place to stay. And so my mom realized that was a perfect opportunity for her as a single mom to watch her kids and be, fill-in parent for these other kids who are away from home, going to school. And she did that for 6 years, and I can remember that really well. It was great time. I had all the big brothers and big sisters that play with, and it was just great times in Ecuador.
And Steve, the gospel actually did penetrate the hearts of the Auca Indians, did it not?
Yeah, so what happened was, nothing changed. In fact, Nankiwi, the guy whose lie had led to them being killed, they killed Nankiwi just a few months later because he, I don't know exactly what he did, but he got the wrong person mad, and they wound up killing him. And then it wasn't for 2 years until some other Wadani women, because of this fighting, this feuding, this killing was still going on. They also fled the tribe, and when they got out to civilization, Betty Elliott was still there. Elizabeth Elliott was still there, and Rachel Saint had been working with Dayuma all this time. And when they got out, and these ladies, they knew Dayuma, right? They remember Dayuma from all these years before, and they were shocked to find she's still alive. And Dayuma tells them, "Hey, we can't live like this. There's a new way to live. I've been taught a new way. I want to go back and teach our people that we shouldn't be killing like this." And that's what happened. Dayuma, along with Rachel Saint, Elizabeth Elliott, went back in, and it's not a group thing. Everyone makes their individual decision, but one by one, they changed. They changed their killing ways. They accepted Jesus, and I've had the opportunity to meet a bunch of them, years later.
Yeah.
And I could never really communicate with them because they didn't learn Spanish, and I barely know any Spanish anyway. But get to spend weeks with them in the jungle, and they're all gone now. Everyone involved in that killing is now gone, but it's they're all in heaven where they belong.
Came to faith in Jesus Christ. Friends, we're talking with Steve McCulley right now, and it looks like we're going to need our final segment as well to kind of wrap up some things in the story itself, and so we'll not be able to open phone lines today, but there's more that you need to hear in our final segment, so we'll be taking the break as we're talking with Steve McCulley, the oldest of three boys of Ed and Mary Lou McCulley. Ed McCulley was slain, martyred on this day, January 8, 1956, 70 years ago today. A reminder, there's many resources available on our website for you to read and learn more on this at vcy.org, vcy.org. Back in a minute. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY American Network.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. Well, since 2010, here on our broadcast, we have been warning since 2010 about Iranian missiles in Venezuela. We've been warning about 5,000 Russian-made man-pads. Those are able to be shot from the ground to the air. We've been warning about those circulating around Venezuela. So I'm very happy with the action that President Trump has taken. Folks can argue about it, and they are free to do so. But from a national security standpoint, I think he was right on the mark when he cited the Monroe Doctrine. The idea we're not going to let other countries, and certainly not enemy states, set up in our backyard. Not in Venezuela, not in Cuba, and certainly not on our border in Mexico or Canada. We'll see what happens with Mexico and with Cuba. But again, I think President Trump is trying to secure the country, and I'm all for it. I'm Brandon House.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. The very first book that really told the story is called Through Gates of Splendor by Elizabeth Elliott. Many of you have access to that. I'm sure you can even contact our bookstore to get a copy, or they can order that for you, but certainly important to know the story here. Today being the 70th anniversary of the martyrdom of five men: Jim Elliott, Nate Saint, Ed McCulley, Peter Fleming, and Roger Udarian. With us today, Steve McCulley, the oldest of three boys of Ed and Mary Lou McCulley. Steve, your grandfather, T.E. McCulley, actually went to Ecuador and met the men who had taken part in the killing, and he actually embraced them. That was amazing.
Yeah, he wrote a letter. I wrote an article. It was published, I think it was Christianity Today. Might have been The Fields, but it's got a picture of him with his arms around the guys who killed his son. And he talks about how excited he is going to be to walk the streets of gold with them. My grandpa was an incredible guy. He was my first hero, and I don't remember my dad, but when my grandpa died, when I was 13 years old, only 10 years after his son died, I was heartbroken. But I remember the story that he told me once. He used to tell Matt and Mike and me stories all the time with all these great lessons. One time he took me down to his study in the basement, and he said, Stevie, you need to know, I was probably 8 or 9, you need to know that God is probably never going to ask you to die for him. I'm a little kid, right? I'm sure I didn't grasp it all. But he is going to ask you to live for him. And I'm sure I didn't understand all that, but it's remarkable. I remember it. I remember my Grandpa McCulley saying that. And isn't that true? That's what God wants. He wants us to live for him.
Yeah.
And my grandpa was a perfect example of that. They tell me that he was a believer his whole life. He was an influential Christian guy, but the death of his son reinvigorated him. And if your listeners are interested in watching the documentary Martyred Men, you can find it on YouTube. It's a 30-minute production that he put together where he's telling the story and how it affected him and how he hopes it will affect the Christian world.
Wow. Well, I know the story and the testimony about your parents overflowed from this tribe. I understand there was a phrase repeated over and over through tears. They came to show us that God loves us and to teach us to love him too. Where would we have found hope if they had not come? Because they gave their lives for us, we too will live. I know, Steve, about 40 years after your dad and other men were killed, your mom wrote this: in a world of uncertainty, there's no greater certainty in my life than God's unfailing love and faithfulness. That's quite a testimony.
Yeah, and then the next line in that letter says, I can say with the hymn writer that all I have needed and so very much more thy hand hath provided. My mom was a piano player, and Matt, Mike, and I grew up going to bed at night once we were back in the States, listening to her play the piano, and countless times it was playing Great is Thy Faithfulness.
And your mom found God's faithfulness indeed was great. I want you to get a word in about your mom as well. We're just under 4 minutes left in our program, but tell us about your mom's homegoing. And I know you and your family actually returned to Ecuador in a special tribute to your mom, and combine that together if you would.
Yeah, we went back to Ecuador. We left in 1962 and then didn't go back again until 2000. In 2000, 22 McCulley family members are, my mom's side and my dad's side, a whole bunch of us went. My mom couldn't go because she was just recovering from cancer surgery. But in 2001, we went back again, and she came. And the reunion that she had with Carmela was incredible. And I talked about Carmela earlier. Carmela, who had begged them not to waste their time on the Wadani. Well, all these years later, Carmela is grown. She's been married. She's got kids. She had 10 kids. She told us when we were sitting around in her house that her first daughter she named Ruth, because Ruth was the first Bible story Miss Mary Lou taught her. And her second daughter she named Mary Lou, after Mary Lou. And she went down the list. And then she said, and I have 4 of my 10 children have married Wadani.
Wow.
She said, I have more Wadani grandchildren than you can count on 2 hands. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, it really is.
That only God can pull this stuff off.
Yeah.
And that was that was my mom. My mom, my 2 brothers and I were so fortunate to never feel any bitterness, never to feel anything, because nobody we knew did. My grandpa lost his son. My grandma lost her son. They didn't express any bitterness. My Uncle Jay lost his big brother. I can't imagine losing my brother. Right? But nobody ever expressed anything except faith in God. Heartbreak, there can be heartbreaks for sure, but trusting God and believing He knows what's best.
And when did your mom go to be with the Lord?
Almost 22 years ago.
Okay.
She was 76. She eventually died from that cancer in 2004. She spent the last 8.5 years of her life living with my wife Ellie and me and she had cancer earlier, and it came back, and eventually that's what sent her to heaven.
Wow. And you went with your family back to Ecuador as a special tribute to your mom.
Yes, we did. So I went in 2000. We went back in 2001. We went back in 2002 with Mark Green and the production crew that had put together Beyond the Gates of Splendor, and we premiered that documentary in the jungle. It was an incredible experience watching these guys watch themselves. They don't know what a movie is, but they were watching themselves up there. And then in 2004, when she died, the people in Nadahuda wanted to have a memorial for her. So we went back, and we actually took some of her ashes and spread them in the Kudarai River, right where her husband, the love of her life, had been. His body went also.
Right. Well, Stephen, we appreciate you carving the time out. Any final word? We're less than 30 seconds. What would you like to leave with the listeners today?
Well, the final word is that we all have a story. God has a story. My story, nobody's going to write a book about it or make a movie about it, and maybe not yours either, but they are all equally important. God has a design for each of us, and our job is to just figure out what it is by praying, by reading His Word. That's how my dad found out what God was reading Nehemiah.
Yeah, reading Nehemiah. Steve, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing that story with our listeners today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Steve McCulley with us here, friends. And again, even as T.E. McCulley said, the incident has proved to be one of the greatest chapters in the annals of missionary martyrdom. So many went to the mission field as a result of the story of these 5 men. God bless you, friends. Thanks for joining us on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Take Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.